They came together to overcome the last dungeon. The team of the Misty Flower. They easily dealt with magical beasts, killing them in packs. And the leader is known as the Immortal. This berserk player lived for battle and destruction. His name was No Yunha. And this time, the hero went to one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, which no one had ever gone so far. It was the dungeon of the abyss. He pulled his sword out of the slain magical creature. There was blood on his armor and sword. The hero looked on intently. It was too early to rest. A group of 3 giant Masvers stood before him. He was in the place where he would die at the age of 32. Growling with all his might, the hero rushed to attack, cutting one of the beasts with a strong jerk. The pigman fell to the floor, losing his head and 2 arms. The berserker exhaled after the attack. Suddenly, a cobra crawled up from the flank and attacked the hero. The berserker barely had time to react and shield himself from the bite with his hand. The snake clutched his forearm with its jaw. But the hero's experience helped him this time. Reacting quickly, he raised his hand with the snake up, made a swing, and then slammed it on the floor with all his might. In pain, the snake pulled off its bitten arm, and No Yunha immediately cut off its head. Meanwhile, the last of the 3 Masvers decided to attack the hero. He got into a fighting stance, gathered his strength, and rushed at No Yunha. The hero decided to strike back. But unfortunately, the sword did not overcome the strong teeth of the Masver and broke. Yunha was trapped. He received a strong blow from the Masver and then flew to the side. The hero lost a lot of blood from the blow, but he was still conscious. When he got to his feet, the water around him began to slowly catch fire. Masver decided to make a finishing attack while No Yunha summoned a new weapon. He brought his spiked fist in to strike. But No Yunha's weapon summoning was almost complete. Each of the opponents tried to launch a fatal attack. But at the last moment, No Yunha won with a well-aimed blow from the bottom of his head. The enemy fell dead. Finally, No Yunha could catch his breath. He looked behind him. There was a horrifying scene waiting for him. Besides the Masver, his entire group was lying dead. They had all been killed by the monsters in the battle. Despite this, No Yunha continued to move deeper into the dungeon. He took the sword of one of his comrades, adding that the death of the group did not matter to him. He went deeper, moving his feet through the pools of blood. Yunha was going to kill the boss himself. He gritted his teeth and walked up to the boss's room. Yunha pushed the gate forward and it slid open, opening the way. He walked on and on. It was pitch black in the boss's room. But No Yunha could feel the presence of a monster. The Master of Darkness, that was his name. In the midst of the pitch blackness, a bright red light flashed and grew larger. Suddenly, it opened completely, and a huge human eye appeared in the darkness, glowing red from all sides. But No Yunha hardly noticed it. As the eye opened, it launched its first attack. The hero was violently thrown back, piercing his stomach. The radius of the attack expanded, and the hero flew farther and farther away along with the floor of the room. He dropped his sword and crashed into one of the hall's columns. The impact caused blood to spurt from his body. No Yunha fell to the ground and then laughed like a madman. He realized that this was where he would meet his death. The enemy was too strong and humanity too weak to defeat him. For No Yunha, dying in such a place was not so bad. It was the deepest floor that humanity had ever reached. But the hero still could not believe that he would die at the hands of some monster. Unexpectedly, a blonde girl screamed at him in tears, begging him not to die. But Yunha looked at her. It was Li Yuan. The hero was surprised that she was alive. The girl tried her best to heal the berserker. But No Yunha asked her to leave him and run away. But the girl did not want to put up with it. She was ready to cure Yun no matter what, even though she realized that his wounds were too serious. It was a miracle that he was holding on. Then she had an idea. She needed to create a miracle, and then the hero would survive. But No Yunha was slowly losing consciousness, feeling his death. He began to remember his life. The berserker had no regrets, except for one thing. he would leave his partner alone with the monster. He asked her for forgiveness. Yunha was not used to getting attached, but he was still worried about one girl who would be left all alone on the top of the world from now on. Her name was Baekryun. The hero thanked her for seeing only the best in him. Meanwhile, Li Yuan did not give up trying to save Young. She was even ready to bring him back in time, to save him at any cost. The spell began to work, and a column of golden light fell from the ceiling on the two of them. It continued to grow until it turned into an explosion. Li Yuan had succeeded. No Yunha opened his eyes, and saw his parents looking at him. His father was standing over him with his childhood toy. The couple was happy to see Yunha awake. The hero himself wanted to say something to them, but he managed nothing but an unintelligible childish moan. But Yunga returned to the form of a baby. He was lying in his crib in the nursery, and could not understand what was happening. Is this what the afterlife looks like? His parents continued to talk to him, smiling, explaining simple words. No Yunha stretched out his childish hand and grabbed his mother's little finger. The woman beamed with happiness. His father was a little jealous. Then Yunha realized everything. This was not the afterlife. Here he could not do anything, not even move normally. He did not die, but simply returned to the time when he was 1 year old. But even that was impossible. It was impossible to just rewind time. But if this is the same miracle that allows the impossible to happen, then Li Yuan used it right before the boy's death. Since she had reached the level of the 12 thrones, it was no surprise that she was able to turn back time. No Yunga's parents began to look at the child, thinking about who he looked like. No Yunha did not think that he would ever see his parents again in his life. Both of them died when he was 6 years old from Maswar. Since then, he has had a burning hatred for all evil. But he was given a second chance. Yunha swore that this time he would change the future. The baby clenched his fist, and his parents ran to take pictures. Despite the fact that the boy retained his memory, he remained a child, which meant he was completely helpless. Now his life consisted of eating, sleeping, and going to the toilet. Still, he got a chance to breathe again, which gave him the opportunity to roll over from his back to his stomach. But during his attempt, a child's voice called out to him. The girl was supporting his efforts to roll over. Her name was No Yunha. She was his sister, and 4 years older than him. His memory of her was much more hazy than that of his parents, but there was one moment Yunha remembered in detail. How the two of them were sitting in a car after a car accident, with 2 bloody seats in front, and his older sister just kept repeating that she would never leave him. That was the day the monster took his family. His sister held his hand tightly, and repeated one phrase. And yet, Yun managed to roll over. His sister rejoiced at his accomplishment. She took the baby in her arms, and began to hug him in a fit of love. Mana was everywhere. And after a while, the young man was able to feel and accumulate it again. Although there was not much of it, it was in the air. In his past life, Yunga had a lack of mana, so it was difficult for him. Now he was taking advantage of the opportunity, and collecting it as long as time allowed. His sister took over his mana collection. While Yunga was doing this, he noticed something. His sister was soaked in an incredible amount of mana. When an individual accumulates so much energy, it ends in pycnosis, which in turn is harmful to health. And before that happened, Yunga had to help her control her mana. The sister was unaware of her problem, and carelessly taught Yun how to walk. When Yun was 4 years old, he could walk and talk freely. There was a lot to do, and so he began to spend more time outside. His sister often took him for walks with her, and the children were always happy to see the girl. She not only communicated well with other children, but also with everyone in the neighborhood. Unlike Yun. One of those times, when he and his sister were walking, a girl called out to him. She was not very happy to see him, and immediately told him that he had no business being there. Yunga justified himself by saying that he had been brought here against his will, and began to tease her by deforming her name. Drin Minji. Kim Minji didn't like it, and she immediately became childishly angry. But Yunga didn't care about her remarks. All the children stood in a circle to choose a game for the day. Since there were more of them than usual, they chose Cossacks and robbers. Yunga didn't like the fact that he was 32 and still had 4 years to go in the company of children. But his sister was incredibly happy. She was about to tell Yunha the rules of the game. Yunga said that it was always nice to see her smile. When it was evening, Yunga and his sister went home. All their clothes and themselves were dirty from falling. Yunha began to complain about it. But the boy could not help but admit that he had fun. Suddenly they heard the sound of an aggressive dog growling. The dog that was going to attack them was most likely mad. The girl, although she was scared to death, covered her brother with her body. In a panic, she tried to assure the boy that everything would be fine. Yunha remembered his sister again on the day his parents died. And now he saw how scared Yuna really was. He could not let this happen. He took his sister's forearm and asked and pushed her away from him to walk forward. This time, Yunha was not as weak as in his past life. Everything was different now. He covered his sister and prepared to take the fight. In this life, Yunha would protect her. Activating his mana, Yunga instantly burst into blue flames. The blue flame emitted lightning and accumulated a huge amount of energy. The dog was frightened and became defensive. Seeing such power in a little boy, it had only one way out. Yunha was going to beat him to death, so the dog ran away with its tail between its legs. Seeing that the dog was already running away, Yunha began to release the accumulated mana. The boy squeaked out a sigh of relief, and his sister looked at him with the most surprised eyes. Yunga smiled and told his sister that everything was fine. But his sister was not listening to him anymore. She ran up and asked him how he had done it and asked him to teach her. This was an expected reaction, but it still touched Young a little. He said he would teach her. Her sister was very happy about this. In fact, Yunga was going to teach his sister how to control mana to help her health. The sister was beaming with joy. She grabbed Yunga's hand, and the two of them ran home to avoid making their mother worry. Yunha always wanted to protect his sister's smile. Before his body regressed in time, the Masviri had killed his family. This had to be prevented from happening again. To change the future, the boy was ready to do anything. As Yunha promised, Yuna began to learn magic from him. They practiced on children's toys. His sister had to spin a spinning top without using her hands. But the girl could not do it. She had to control the force she was putting in. Yuna had a gift for storing large amounts of mana, but no talent for control. Yuna rolled up her sleeves and prepared to spin the wheel as fast as she could. She poured a huge amount of mana into the toy. But the spinning top did not behave as she wanted it to. It flew out behind Yuna's back and started jumping all over the apartment without stopping. Looking at this scene, Yunha concluded that the girl still had a lot to learn. In the evening, the whole family gathered in front of the TV to watch one of the many monotonous shows. Taking advantage of the presence of the entire family, his mother reminded Young that he was about to turn 6. This meant that he would be going to kindergarten. Young didn't want to do that. Through constant persuasion, he convinced his parents that he shouldn't go. But he still promised that he would go to kindergarten when he turned 6. Yunha couldn't believe that he would be stuck among the children, who were constantly crying for so long. He already had a headache all the time. The countdown started on the TV. There was only 1 minute left in the year. One of the anchors said that today would leave a mark on human history. The program began to show footage from the live broadcast. The presenter was in a helicopter near the tomb of a Joseon dynasty. She said that today a new episode in history would begin. Yunha remembered what happened last time. After people discovered mana, they did nothing but use it. But no one took into account the fact that mana creates monsters when used. In 1999, an incident occurred right before the beginning of the 21st century. It was called the end of the century. About 30% of the population was lost then. Humanity was trembling with fear. People had to live under constant threat. All governments immediately lost their legitimacy. The only force that could resist this was mana. It created a new hierarchy. The richest and most influential people, together with players with powerful mana, overthrew the remaining authorities and united in a new force. But by the time the situation stabilized, humanity had suffered enormous damage. Cities lost contact with each other. Large areas were left in isolation. Their death was a matter of time. But in Korea, which was full of despair, a small light of hope was lit. It was a girl dressed in traditional clothes. She was just incredibly beautiful. Youngda's sister recognized this as well. Her name was Lim Gil. She was a popular actress, but she became the first goddess to protect Korea. She could stop the effect of mana and dispel it. This was called the gift of white grace. All the players protecting the altar will become the sword protectors of Korea, which will be called the 12 Thrones. The players are managed by the Mana Control Bureau, but the strongest of them create their own clans. As a person who received a rare gift that can stop monsters and is very influential in Korea, Lim Gil was one of the 12 Thrones. Players who became a throne and belonged to a clan could use the Mana Counter Bureau and the power of their clan to monitor the activities of players. This is how Korea was able to survive. The 12 Thrones and the goddess protector stood between the monsters and the people of Korea. Lim Gil herself could interact with the crystal sphere that accumulated mana. The woman prayed to the gods in front of it to give her the strength to protect Korea. The sphere began to glow and Gil's magic spread for miles, covering cities. On TV they called it a cocoon, a hemispherical barrier that would not allow mana to rage. Yuna got up from the couch to see the barrier with her own eyes from the window. Yunha followed her. His sister was amazed at the amount of colors that covered the sky. People on the streets could not take their eyes off the magic either. The night sky was too beautiful. Yunha's and Yuna's parents put their hands together to pray. They thanked the goddess for the peace. And it was not just their parents who did this. The entire population of Seoul put their hands together, thanking for protection. Everyone was thinking only of the goddess, who had given them peace. As Yuna watched her parents pray, she decided to follow suit and suggested that Yunha do the same. But Youngda had a completely different opinion about the situation. There were no gods in this world. When the end came, the gods died too. The sky began to glow dimmer and dimmer, and after a while everyone could see the familiar night darkness above. Yunha noticed this, and Yuna continued to pray for her family to live happily ever after. Her brother looked at her and smiled, for in this life her sister's prayer would come true. Yunha also put his palms together, showing unity with his family. But the goddess's calendar showed that no Yunha would soon be 6. The turtle-like monster, with squid tentacles, woke up and opened his eyes. The incident that took away Youngda's family was getting closer. At the age of 6, as promised, Young was sent to kindergarten. The rectangular building in dim colors was called Evergreen Pines. The teacher, whose name was Taeyo, immediately rushed to introduce Young to the other children. He asked Youngda to introduce himself. Youngda decided not to be elaborate and simply said his name and age. The children did not pay much attention to him. Teacher Taeyo didn't like Youngda's presentation and asked him to add something else so that the children could make friends with him. But Young didn't need children as friends. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice. It was the girl he used to tease on the playground while playing with his sister. She was unhappy with Youngda's presence in the group. But Youngda again responded to her dissatisfaction with his trademark teasing, which made Minji furious. She really didn't like the nickname. The teacher immediately asked everyone to calm down, saying that the children would have free time until lunch to socialize, and again asked them to be kinder to Young. But before the teacher's hand could let go of Young's shoulder, the children immediately ran up to him and began to actively communicate with him. Taeyo realized that there was no point in worrying about the child's socialization. Later, Youngda managed to escape from the children and their intrusive questions. The boy came to the children's book corner. He took a book from the shelf. Of course, they were for toddlers, but it was better to spend time reading than sitting among the children's noise. Yunha took a chair to sit at the desk. He did not notice that a girl was also sitting next to him, reading. She turned her attention to Yunga. Under the falling rays of the sun, she found Yunga's face particularly beautiful. She liked the boy. But no sooner had she admired the neighbor than she was called out from behind by 3 boys. The bullies didn't understand what was so interesting about books. One of the missing boys named the girl Yang Hyan. He started to bug Hyan about what she was reading because she had no friends. Hyan was a little worried about the situation. One of the hooligans tore a bough off the girl's head. The girl immediately tried to take it back. But the boy did not want to give it back. Hyan asked to give it back and said it was a gift from her father, but no one listened to her. The hooligans started throwing the bough to each other so that the girl could not take it. Tears appeared on Yang Hyan's face. Then Yunha interrupted their cruel game. He said that their activity was childish, removing the smile from the faces of the bullies. Everyone in the room turned their attention to Yunha. The leader of the bullies was seriously angry at what he heard. Yunga got up from the table and looked up from his reading, approaching the leader. He aggressively repeated the same thing to his face, hinting that this game was no fun. The bully immediately raised his fist to strike Yunga's face. But the former dungeon crawler easily dodged it. He knocked the bully down with a slash that caused him to drop the bough from his hands. Before the bough could fall, Yunha immediately grabbed it. The bully fell to the ground, and Yunha gave the girl back her item, advising her to be more careful next time. The bully on the ground began to shout that he would not let this situation go. It was quite strange for Yunha to hear this from a 6-year-old. He turned back to the 3 fools and made it clear with his gaze that he was ready for anything. The bullies ran away. At the same time, the girl grabbed Yunha's sleeve, calling him names. Tears were still in her eyes, but she was grateful to her hero. Meanwhile, Yunga noticed that the mini-me and the leader of the bullies, Yunhuk, had more mana than the average person. But the others in the kindergarten did not stand out. Except for the girl he had just saved. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. She probably had more mana than even Yunga Yuda's sister. But unlike her sister, the girl was able to control her power so that it did not fly away. In the future, such a child would become one of the 12 thrones, or at least their apprentice. Yunha was surprised that he had never heard her name before the regression. He began to look at Hyan carefully. Even if the girl hadn't become a player, she would have been very popular because of the amount of mana inside her. Without knowing why, Yunga extended his hand to the girl and offered to be friends. The girl shyly shook his hand and agreed. Mana was a very powerful force in this world, and knowing this girl's potential, it would be nice to stay close to her. Hyan thanked Yunha again, hoping that they would be good friends. After a while, Yunha returned home. His mother was grateful for the paper flower he had made in the kindergarten. She pinned it on his sweater. She took it out of Yunha's backpack. The mom also thanked Yuna for her craft. But Yunha noticed that her sister was not very good with her hands. It took the boy a while to realize that it was also a flower. Yuna smiled and said that she had another flower that Yunha had made. There were 3 of them. One for Mom, one for Yuna. Mom asked who the last one was for. Yunha replied that it was for her grandmother. Before the regression, when Parents' Day came, Yunha and other children would make these paper flowers at school. Yunga was forced to make them with everyone else in the class, even though his parents were already dead. They were always crumpled up at the bottom of Yunga's backpack. His grandmother would always find them and put them on the nightstand in the hallway. But on none of the holidays did Yunga give them directly. He believed that if he gave a flower to his grandmother, his grief for his parents would immediately disappear, along with his hatred of monsters. The boy did not show his gratitude until the day his grandmother died, but this time he would do things differently. On May 4th, the government decided to open the forbidden roads so that citizens could connect with their families in other cities during Family Month. A huge number of players were hired to be ready for the monsters on the roads. But due to the sudden appearance of the Kraken, a large number of people died. It was on the way to his grandmother's house that the young man's family fell into its clutches and died. It was just like the last time. Her father suggested that she see her grandmother on vacation. Yuna began to think about it. But Yunha knew he had to stop his parents at any cost. Her grandmother was the only one in the family. Her father was an orphan, so her grandmother was only related to her on her mother's side. Before his return and after the death of his family, it was his grandmother who raised him. She supported Yun when he was sick and a complete failure, but then she died. His father said that it used to be dangerous to go out of town, but this year the government has taken care of the roads, so things should be different. But father's musings were interrupted by Youngda, who asked Mom and Dad to visit Grandma another time. Mom asked why. Youngda had even made a flower for her, which meant he really wanted to see her. Yunha admitted that he wanted to see his grandmother, but not on that day. He begged to postpone the trip. The boy realized that he was a kid now, and his word meant nothing. Therefore, he had to act like a child so that his parents would not suspect anything. Yunha smiled and changed the subject, saying that it was soon Children's Day, and he wanted to go to the amusement park to ride a Viking, because it was not far from home. Yuna immediately took up his idea. The parents thought about it, because the children had never been to the park before because of the monster's activity. The father agreed to fix it, and said they would go to the amusement park tomorrow. Mom volunteered to cook something for lunch and asked for suggestions. Yuna immediately started ordering a banquet. Yunha was overjoyed. He realized that if you can't get in the way of a kraken, you can change the path of a family so that they don't cross paths. This would change the future. But Yunha's joy was interrupted by a phone call. His mother received a call saying that something had happened to his grandmother. Mom immediately lost her smile. She asked the caller to take care of Grandma. Yuna and father started asking Mom what had happened. It turned out that Grandma had fainted. Junha did not understand how this could happen. Before the regression, she had been doing well, right up until Yunha joined the Players' Academy. Mom said it was probably nothing serious, but she was worried. We need to see her. The father said he supported his beloved and would go with her. He told the children that the family could not go to the park at this time. So tomorrow, as soon as the road guards are ready, they will go to their grandmother's house. Mom walked over to Young. She knelt down and asked him to be an understanding son and postpone the trip to the park for another time. Yunha realized that all his actions to change the future would have concrete consequences. This time it was his grandmother who got hurt. Who knows what else could happen? So he couldn't stop his family from facing the Kraken. Then another question arose. Why did he go back in time? Events don't have differences. But when he thought about it coldly, Junha realized that there were differences. Jungda was the difference. He had become different. He had been accumulating mana since he was a child, and he had battle experience from his past life. And if he can't stop his family from meeting the Kraken, he has no choice now. Yunha agreed to go to his grandmother's house. But he wasn't going to give up. In his mind, he remembered the tentacles of the huge monster. The mana around Youngda became more active. He imagined himself facing the monster. Youngda mentally prepared himself for the fact that he would have to accept this battle. The Mana Control Bureau classified all monsters according to their level of threat to humanity. The classes were as follows: 9th, monsters that pollute the environment; 8th, those that threaten daily life; 7th, monsters that rob and kill; 6th, monsters that terrorize city districts and gather in groups and enter people's territory; 5th, monsters that wreak terror alone or in groups with equal strength; 4th, monsters that lead hordes of other monsters; 3rd, monsters that threaten a government and are equivalent to a natural disaster; 2nd, those that threaten all governments at the same time and are equivalent to a catastrophe; 1st, monsters that threaten the existence of all mankind. The Kraken belonged to the 3rd class. Before the regression, around the time Yunha entered the academy, the Kraken was upgraded to Class 4 because of the player's great efficiency. But still, E and C rank players are too weak to battle a Kraken. Youngda realized that he could not defeat it now. The Kraken was too strong a monster for a 6-year-old boy. Therefore, there was only one possibility. Wait for the 12 thrones to kill the monster. He had to buy as much time as possible. Yunha began to go through his arsenal. A child could not have good weapons. Only scissors and a box cutter. A kitchen knife would have been a good weapon, but his mother would notice it was missing. But even his current weapon, when endowed with mana, could do some damage to the miracle. Yuna went into her brother's room to check on his readiness for the trip. She said that everyone was already packed. Yunha smiled into her sister's face and said that he was on his way. But when he turned away from her, his eyes were filled with determination. The opening of the roads caused traffic jams in the city. Yuna fell asleep in the car on her brother's shoulder. Her mother returned to the children's seat to suggest that Yunha sleep as well. It was a long drive. But Yunha said with a smile that everything was fine, and he was not sleepy. He recalled at that time the Kraken appeared on the Sanson Bridge just as the family was crossing it. But they were already halfway across. Then why didn't the Kraken appear? It could mean only one thing. Something else in the future had changed. Yunha wanted to cross the bridge safely. But a huge explosion in the middle of the bridge changed his hope. Fate could not be changed. His mother and father froze at what they saw. Wreckage of the bridge flew in all directions. Yunha panicked, and Yuna began to wake up. The Kraken seemed to be laughing at Yunha's desire to change everything, but he appeared anyway. A third-grade monster of the natural disaster level. Kraken. The monster continued to destroy the bridge. Cars flew into the air along with pieces of concrete. The destruction reached a colossal scale. There seemed to be no safe place on the bridge. Debris from the bridge was flying at the cars stuck in traffic, doing people to death. Ordinary people were running for their lives. They called for help from the players to stop this disaster. The players ran towards the Kraken. The main goal was to protect people. But before they could get close to the Kraken's body, one of the hunters noticed a huge shadow over their heads. It was one of the tentacles. It crushed all the defenders, destroying any chance of escape. People were losing hope as they watched. The surviving players, noticing the death of their comrades, also began to flee. Crake was taking over humanity. Watching everything from the car, Yunha's father told the family to get off the bridge. There was complete chaos around, so they had to be careful. He asked the family to trust him. If they move calmly to the exit, they will stay alive. But his eyes showed animal fear and panic. Yunha and Yuna were also anxious when they looked at their father. The mother turned to the children and ordered them to obey their father. She said that the players would protect them. The family began to get out of the car. The last to get out was Yuna, who at one point felt strangely weak. Unable to stand on her feet, she fell to the ground. Yuna could not get to her feet. She realized that she had to get up and walk, but her body would not listen. The father saw this, and came to the girl and took her in his arms. He also asked how Yunha was feeling. Yunha said that everything was fine, and he could go. Suddenly, one of the players called out to the family. He showed them the way to the evacuation point. When the third-class monster appeared, many players panicked, but the veterans were able to quickly adapt and organize the evacuation. But Yunha remembered that the Kraken was not the only problem. They had to cross the bridge as quickly as possible. Suddenly, a spear pierced the stomach of one of the players. The man immediately fell dead. Yunha's family was even more frightened when they saw this. Yunha realized that they were already here. The monsters were coming out from under the bridge. They were 7th-grade monsters. They were called diving monsters. The diving monsters had a fish-like face with huge predatory teeth. They immediately attacked the rescuers who were evacuating people. Now Yunha's family had to flee on their own because the players were busy fighting. One of the players was holding a wounded woman and looking for someone with healing magic. Such a person responded and ran towards the wounded woman, but before he could reach her, he was killed by a diver's spear. The Molochs continued their attack, trying not to leave anyone alive. The player and the wounded woman were doomed. Watching this horror, Yunha and her family had no idea what to do. Then his father summoned all his courage and asked them to trust him, promising to protect everyone at all costs. His next order was to not look back and just run forward. The family immediately started to do so. They ran as fast as they could through the wreckage of the bridge. The Kraken, meanwhile, was not going to calm down. Gathering the wreckage of the cars together with one of its tentacles, it lifted them up and threw them toward the bridge. The cars began to fall down like raindrops. Yunha shouted to his father that his plan was too risky. Many people were injured in the attack. One of the cars hit a fuel tank on the bridge, causing a huge explosion. A huge pile of fire and smoke blocked the family's exit from the bridge. The last hope for salvation had just disappeared before their eyes. The surviving players could not understand why reinforcements were not approaching the bridge. But the roads were blocked by fire. He had to hold out until help arrived. Junha realized that he had to wait for the thrones at all costs. The 12 thrones arrived at the regression 30 minutes later than the Kraken. It was unlikely that the players would be able to defend anyone if the escape routes were blocked. They could take care of the divers. But if no one stopped the Kraken, everyone on the bridge was doomed. Yunha exhaled the air from his lungs to calm himself. He had been preparing for this since the beginning. Even if he had to sacrifice his own life, he would protect his family. Yunga took a pair of scissors and a box cutter and began to quickly prepare for the battle. His mom noticed this. Yunha went back to his parents. He asked them to stay put until help arrived. His father could not understand what Yunha was going to do. Yunha said that the players would be able to repel the monster's attacks. But even if something happened, Yuna would protect them. Yuna was the only one who could control mana besides Yuna. That's why the boy asked her to look after his parents. He believed in his sister. But she was still scared. Yunga turned around and ran toward the battle. As he ran toward the Kraken, Yunha used mana on his legs to run and jump faster. He pushed off the machines with all his might, which gave him incredible speed. The flow of mana enveloped his entire body and burst out with blue sparkles. It was a mobility skill that Yunha used before regression. He used it for the first time in a child's body, and it was quite difficult. But this way, he could reach Karkin almost instantly. Jumping several meters up, Jungda kept moving toward the epicenter of the disaster. He avoided the adults, who were running away from the monster. They were shouting at him that it was dangerous to go there, but they could not stop him. The divers reacted to Yunha's movement and tried to stop him. But Yunga saw this and pushed off the roof of the car as hard as he could and wrapped his clerical knife in mana. For Murlocs flew at him with the desire to kill him. One of them attacked Yunga with his hand, and he managed to dodge it and cut off its head in return. Yunha landed on a car and prepared for 2 more diving blocks. Jumping over one of them, he stabbed the monster in the neck as deeply as he could to kill it for sure. But another monster was already flying at him in the air. With one quick jerk, Yunha cut off its head. But suddenly the boy felt someone approaching from the left. He barely had time to shield himself from the attack of the last diver, but the impact of the blow to the windshield made him roll over and barely managed to stand on his feet. The fights did not end there. Yunha swung his knife as hard as he could and used an attack from his past life, when he was still a berserker. He cut off the monster's arm and immediately reacted to the monster on the right. In his mind, battle scenes from his past battles popped up. It was as if Yunha was moving according to a ready-made script. With one skillful movement, he cut off the arm of the diver who approached from behind. The boy felt that his skills were returning. It was the same feeling he got from destroying the wonders. At that moment, Yunha became an immortal again. His rage went beyond his body, and his face began to resemble the berserker he had been before the regression. Feeling completely merged with his past life, Yunha could kill the divers without much difficulty. A few blows were enough. The boy moved faster, and after killing a flock of divas, he landed on the ground. But a diver was already waiting for him, hiding under one of the cars. Yunha quickly jumped up and fell on the monster and finished it off. But there was another one in the air from the back. Yunha jumped toward it, cutting it in half in midair. His knife began to crumble from the impact. He noticed that it didn't last long. Throwing away the clerical knife, he took the scissors out of his pocket and continued to move towards the kraken. In flight, Yunha split the scissors in half. Mana again enveloped his body to move. Soon, he stopped in front of the monster's face. He stood in a fighting stance, holding the scissor blades in his hands. I had to fight with what I had. The kraken raised its tentacle up and struck the bridge again. Once again, cars flew in a hail of cars toward Young. The boy dodged and jumped onto the kraken's attacking tentacle, starting to move quickly along it. Having covered the required distance, Yunha jumped off the tentacle again and for a moment just hovered in the air in front of the kraken's face. He plunged the scissor blades into its head and began to descend without taking them out. As soon as the boy stopped, he took one of the blades out of the kraken's body and stuck it back in, continuing to cut the monster to pieces. Dark soup began to pour out of the kraken. But the young man noticed that a tentacle was preparing to attack him from the side. The boy did a flip and dodged it, and got back on his feet. One of the blades of his scissors was no longer combat ready. Throwing it to the ground, Yunha began to wonder if he had anything else. Grabbing the last blade with both hands, he began to pour an incredible amount of mana into it. Yunga dodged another tentacle attack as he climbed back up toward the monster. It tried to strike back. The boy again tried to strike the body from the air. But Yunha didn't have time to do it. The kraken repelled the attack with a tentacle, throwing Yunga to the ground. The boy hit the ground and then immediately got back up. The situation was difficult. His mana was almost gone. Karkin began to destroy the bridge supports under Yunga. He hit one of the columns with his tentacle. The boy could not stand on his feet because of this. This monster was terribly annoying. Yunha started jumping on the wreckage of the bridge to avoid falling into the water. The kraken continued to rage and destroy everything in its path. Yunha had barely managed to reach a solid surface when a tentacle of the kraken lifted the truck up. The kraken began to squeeze the car, causing it to crack. Then it threw it with all its might. Yunha stood in a defensive stance. Suddenly, his body was again overwhelmed by a huge amount of mana. Yunga shouted that the kraken was about to get the full program. He raised the scissors up and poured so much mana into them that the aura around them turned into a long sword. The truck kept flying in his direction. Yunha swung and easily cut it into two pieces. The sliced vehicle exploded behind him. Suddenly, Yunga felt weakness in his body. He looked down at his hands, which could barely hold the scissors blade, which was no longer enveloped in mana. Everything began to blur before his eyes, and he fell to the ground. He was lying motionless around the smoke and fire on the burning bridge, and the scissors blade had fallen from his hands. Yunha realized that he could barely move. Had his mana run out? He couldn't lose consciousness now. If he lost consciousness, then everything he had done now would be for nothing. Yunga's eyes were slowly closing. Suddenly, he could find the strength to slam his fist into the ground. Not now. You can't pass out now. You have to go all the way. Gritting his teeth, Yunha tried to pick up the scissors. He caught himself thinking that he wanted to live. He thought of his family. He wanted to live this life with them. The kraken was already bringing its tentacle in to crush the boy. But Yunha did not want to die here. His eyes grew dim, and he could only hope for a miracle. And it did happen, when suddenly two glowing palms came from behind Yunha. It was Yuna, and she hugged Yun and shouted at the kraken not to touch her brother. Golden mana began to appear around her. It created a hemisphere around the children, expanding and burning everything in its path. The tentacle of the kraken that wanted to kill Young was burned by the incredibly strong mana. The divers saw this, and did not have time to do anything and were erased forever. The hemisphere turned into a huge golden pillar. Yunha could not believe it. The miracle had saved him again. In this world, a miracle was the ability to change the world and its laws. Before the regression, Yunha knew only 4 people who had this gift. One of them was his reliable partner Li Yuan. When Yunha first saw Yuna's mana capacity, he thought, "What if Yuna actually possesses a Dharam Diva?" The sister continued to hug Yunha. The boy noticed that his wounds were healing. But the sister's mana did not only do that. The light also protected the children from the Kraken. But the use of the miracle did not go unnoticed. Those who had this gift paid a heavy price for its use. Junha asked his sister how she was feeling. Was she in any pain? Yuna said she was fine. Then the girl began to lose consciousness. She said she was very tired and passed out in Yuna's arms. The girl was sleeping sweetly. She had just enough mana left in her body to keep her alive. Yunha thought that perhaps for his sister, the price of using the miracle was her mana. Carefully, he laid his sister down on the ground to rest. Yunha was able to handle the rest of the work himself. His body was covered with mana again. The Kraken almost completely emerged from the water, preparing to fight. Its red eyes looked toward Yunha and were ready to kill him. Yunha noticed that the monster opened its eyes. Was it really that afraid of Yuna? The tentacle was ready to kill them both, but Yunha was ready. He struck a sharp blow, and the monster's blood splashed out. He used his hand to cut the tentacle in half. Yunha told the Kraken that it could not harm his sister, and he stood in a fighting posture, covered in mana. The Kraken continued to strike, but Yunha calmly deflected them by cutting the monster's limbs. His mana was restored. The boy realized that he could not defeat the Kraken, but the future had already changed. His family was alive, and he had nothing to fear anymore. He just had to hold out until the throne arrived. When the Kraken appeared, he was on the Wonhyo Bridge, not far from the scene. Meanwhile, the throne was sitting in a car, tired of being stuck in traffic. The cars were not even thinking of moving. He ordered his driver to step on the pedals. But the driver could do nothing, and said that all the roads around Seoul were clogged. A man with shaggy hair told the driver that he was thinking of leaving the 12 thrones because he had to work during the Golden Vacation. He joined because he wanted to fight with strong people in a team. But now, he had to deal with civilian problems. This was pissing off one of the thrones. Suddenly, the driver and the throne felt something. It was a huge amount of mana. The phone rang for the throne. He picked up the phone and asked if he had imagined it. But the caller assured him that everything was real. Priestal asked what class the monster was in. Then he was given information about the Kraken. The throne thought for a second, then smiled slyly and asked where exactly the monster was. The monster was destroying infrastructure and killing people, but that only amused the throne. People would be unhappy to know about this reaction. The interlocutor reported that the incident happened on the Sansen Bridge, and that the players could not handle the situation on their own. The source did not know the exact damage done to the monster, but was confident that the throne would be able to complete everything. He promised to pick up Priestal and bring him to the access. The throne got out of the car without telling the driver anything. The driver was afraid of this reaction. Priestal began to warm up and told the driver that he would get there on his own, because the traffic would not allow him to reach the bridge in time. He opened the trunk of the car and took out his sword. The driver didn't understand why he had to walk to the bridge. It would take 2 hours to get there, but the throne could get there in 30 minutes. He activated his power and mana began to pour out of him. Mana covered his whole body, and the throne was very serious. He put a large amount of mana into his legs and pushed off the ground. With incredible speed, the throne flew forward. The driver was a little upset when he saw this. But one could not expect anything else from the leader of his clan. This throne was simply a battle-ready one. He always chose to fight only against strong enemies. It was the Lord of the Sword clan, the fire demon Kang Hyunchul. Half an hour later, the fire demon was already there, slashing the divers with his fire sword. Moving forward to the epicenter of the events, Kang Hyunchul noticed a huge golden pillar of mana. He was surprised to see magic. After all, there shouldn't be people here capable of such a thing. The throne smiled. This meant that someone new had appeared who could control mana. At this time, the Kraken and Yunha were in the second round of the fight. Yunha was delivering strong slashing blows to the monster. As he was making another swing to attack the Kraken, Yunha noticed that the throne had entered the battle. At last, the fire demon Kong Hyuncheol had arrived. One of the Kraken's tentacles began to burn. The Kraken howled in pain and began to retreat and sink under the water until it disappeared. It was already night outside. The gift of pyrokinetics allowed him to freely control the fire. This is where the nickname Fire Demon came from. Kong Hyuncheol looked around for people, but found no one but the two children on the bridge. The fire demon looked at them with disdain. But he noticed that a whole stream of mana was passing around the girl. He assumed that the magic was coming from her. He realized that the girl had used up all her mana and fainted, and the boy was protecting her from the monster. The fire demon smiled, recognizing that both children were strong. He was curious to see what kind of players they would become. Kong Hyuncheol waved and told them not to be afraid of him. He would not harm them. At least for now, he added quietly. Yunha looked at him aggressively. The throne said he had only one goal now, to destroy the Kraken. He told the boy to stay away, because the Kraken would soon be coming out of the water again. Meanwhile, underwater, the Kraken with damaged limbs was preparing for a new attack. Before the demon came back, Vogu and Yunha also saw each other. The fire demon once said when he saw Yunha that fame comes faster than he does. The immortal then looked at Kong Hyuncheol suspiciously and asked what he wanted. The fire demon wanted to make sure that the immortal was really as strong as he was said to be, so he offered a duel. But for Yunha, it didn't make sense, so he asked Hyuncheol to get out of the way. But the fire demon was not going to go anywhere. He gave the immortal an ultimatum. Yunha had no choice but to draw his sword, saying that the fire demon would regret his choice. The fire demon brought his flaming sword in, ready to strike. Then they crossed swords. But now Yunha, as a child, just watched him and remembered how this person had tried to challenge him to a duel in his past life. But Yunha had never won. With each fight, Hyuncheol became stronger and stronger. He was truly a monster born only to fight. Meanwhile, the fire demon couldn't wait for the Kraken to return. Did the monster get scared of the little light? But in a moment, the tentacle tore down another column under the bridge, and the ground began to slip away again. Yunha and the fire demon felt it. The throne was in a difficult situation. The bridge began to crack at the seams again, and Yunha took his sister in his arms. The fire demon realized that it would be difficult to fight while the children were around. Suddenly, the sound of a stick hitting the ground echoed throughout the battlefield. This spell restored the two columns under the bridge. The fire demon noticed that the help had arrived in time. He called this person the Holy Mother. But the girl with the stick on the helicopter did not like this nickname. She thought she was too young for that. The girl's name was Park Hiram. She didn't understand why the fire demon came here on foot if they could have picked him up in a helicopter. The fire demon replied that he urgently needed to get to Seoul. The girl began to cast a spell. They had to wait for reinforcements to start saving civilians. Now they could focus on the Kraken. The fire demon felt someone else's mana around his body. He told the Holy Mother that he did not need buffs. But the girl did not listen to him. The fire demon told the Holy Mother that he was giving the children to her protection. Yunha watched the events while mana began to accumulate around Yuna again. The Holy Mother realized her task. Meanwhile, the water under the bridge began to turn black. The Kraken was swimming to the surface. It emerged from the left and began to flap its tentacles and scream with all its might. Its eyes were already open. The fire demon was glad to see the monster and immediately rushed into battle. He jumped off the bridge and dove under the water. Then the place where he dived began to glow red. Suddenly, the water caught fire, and a completely burning fire demon began to emerge from it. He walked on the water as if it were a solid surface. Leaving behind burning traces, he kept moving toward the Kraken. The Kraken activated its tentacles. The fire demon looked up and saw that the Kraken's limbs were trying to crush him. They were already flying down on the throne to flatten it, and with a single strong burning punch, Hyunchul stopped all of the monster's attacks. After burning his tentacles, the fire demon called the Kraken a weakling, smiled and raised his sword to deliver the final blow. Swinging the sword as hard as he could, the heroes sent a huge stream of fire forward, which turned into an explosion of incredible magnitude. The Kraken was on fire, and the fire demon watched the monster die as it shrieked. Its fire coating was disappearing, and the Kraken was burning more and more from the attack. Yunha's joy was indescribable. Finally, the Kraken was defeated. Meanwhile, the helicopter landed on the bridge, and the Holy Mother ran up to the children. She asked if they were okay, and told them not to worry. She was going to use healing magic, but she was shocked to see that the children were safe. There was not a scratch on them. She assumed that the pillar of golden light was a miracle that had healed their wounds. She was amazed. The Holy Mother never thought she would see a miracle with her own eyes. She wanted to touch Yuna, but Yunha forbade her to do so. He wrapped himself in manna and told the Holy Mother not to touch Yuna. The girl immediately felt threatened. It was very strange that a child could threaten her like that. She asked Young who he was. At that moment, help from the rescue team arrived on the bridge. The radio in the Holy Mother's ear reported this. She offered to take the children to the hospital. Yunha, holding his sister in his arms, looked warily at the helicopters. The news reported that at 5 p.m., the Kraken had attacked the Sansan Bridge, and that many lives had been lost. Rescue efforts were still underway. Even the government commented on the tragedy. Yunha was sitting in the hospital watching the news. He turned his head away from the screen and looked sadly in the other direction. There was an unconscious Yuna lying there. She was exhausted because of the lack of mana in her body. After taking a mana potion, she would be fine. The memories from her past life did not come true in this one. No one had died. Young was very happy about this. He touched his sister's forehead with his hand. The boy was incredibly happy. He had succeeded in changing the future. Meanwhile, his parents called him. He turned and saw them at the entrance of Yuna's room. They looked exhausted. The bags under their eyes fully emphasized their morale. Young broke out in a cold sweat. He thought his parents were going to kill him. The three of them left Yuna's room to talk. His mother asked Yun if he was hurt, and the boy said he was fine. His father asked him what had happened to Yuna. Young explained to his parents about the lack of mana, sleep, and potions. The father breathed a sigh of relief. Then he began the educational process. He asked his son why he disobeyed and ran away. Yunha could only apologize. But he did not fully understand what he was apologizing for. His family was alive because of him, and that was the best possible outcome. He was not sorry for his actions at all. The boy stood there and did not understand what he had to do. He was pressured by his father's angry gaze and his mother's disappointed look. And then Yunha realized that his parents had no other options for the future. They were worried that a 6-year-old boy had run to the Kraken and put himself in danger. Yunha knew what it was like to lose his family, and so he did what he thought was right without asking his parents' opinion. He realized his mistake and apologized again. Yunha said he was wrong and burst into tears. He promised his parents that this would not happen again. The mother's arms stretched out to the boy. She wanted to hug her son. The son gladly accepted this offer. The father, forgiving Yunga, also joined in the hug and asked that the boy never do that again. Yunga agreed. He was happy because he didn't have to fight monsters. He could just be a child. This is exactly what his parents want him to do. The next morning, Yunga's family was still in the hospital. They were going to discharge Yuna and asked Yunha to wait a bit. Yunha agreed to wait for them in the ward. After the events on the bridge, his parents stopped trusting Yunga. He hoped it would end soon. Meanwhile, Yuna continued to sleep. Yunha sat down with her and started eating candy. He thought they were delicious. But unfortunately, there was not much candy. Yunga was very hungry for sweets because he had worked so hard yesterday. Suddenly a hand held out the candy he wanted. Yunga thanked the hand, and then noticed whose hand it was. It was the fire demon himself. Yunga was alarmed. But Hyunchul was calm. He asked Yunho if he liked chocolate chip cookies while unwrapping them. He put the cookie in his mouth. This surprised Yunga. He thought that the fire demon was dying or had gone mad. But he was already pretty crazy. The fire demon asked Yunga how old he was. Yunga replied that he was 6. The fire demon said that Yunga was still very young. Then he asked how old his sister was. Yunha said the number 10. Then Hyunchul asked about the girl's name. Yunha asked why the throne needed to know her name. But the fire demon said that he did not want to know his sister's name, but his. Yunha told him his name, and the fire demon immediately offered him a place in the player academy and promised to give him a good recommendation. Yunha understood his motives. Hyunchul wanted to send the boy to the academy to train him as a warrior and challenge him to a duel. Yunga was scared that the man had already started raising children for entertainment. But without waiting for an answer, Dmon Fire stood up and said that the boy had time to think about it. After that, he promised to remember Yuna's name. The Holy Mother was waiting for Hyunchul outside the ward. She didn't understand why the fire demon had just left the children after witnessing a miracle. A miracle that had not happened for quite some time. But the demon replied that he did not care. All that matters is how strong these children are. The Holy Mother said that Hyunchul was a battle-crazed idiot. But the fire demon refuted that, saying that he was older than her in the 12 thrones. So she had to choose her words carefully. Besides, if this miracle is really rare, the girl will be overwhelmed by the world's attention as soon as it is exposed. After that, she will never be able to return to normal life. The fire demon asked the Holy Mother if this was what she wanted. But the girl did not know what to say. She had not thought about the situation in this way. Hyunchul asked her if she understood, she could forget what she had seen and just go to lunch with him. The Holy Mother could not immediately focus on the meal. She asked Hyunchul if he was crazy, but he reminded her again to watch her tongue. The fire demon added that he wanted something sweet because he had spent so much energy. The day after the Kraken attack, the family came to Grandma's house. She was waiting for everyone outside. Father asked why she was not in bed. Mom added that you can't do that when you're sick. But Grandma said she missed everyone so much that she wanted to meet them. She also wanted to see her grandchildren. Looking out the car window, Grandma said that the children had no faces. Yunha and Yuna were sleeping peacefully in the back seat of the car, and Grandma decided not to wake them up. Yunha woke up not in the car. His sister was sleeping on top of him, hugging him. Yunha was surprised that his sister was comfortable sleeping like that, and then he noticed that his mother was hugging his father in her sleep. Yunha realized that it must be a hereditary trait. Yunha covered Yuna with a blanket and left the bedroom. He sat in his grandmother's big yard and thought about what had happened. He has more mana now. Maybe it's because of his gift. Before he returned, Yunha's gift was Berserker. The more mana he absorbed, the stronger he became. This helped him deal with the strongest monsters. But as the name implies, the more mana he consumed, the more furious Yunha became. But recalling the situation on the bridge, Yunha realized that his mind was fine. Even when he cut the truck in half, he felt nothing. If there is a penalty in this life, it is the best gift. Perhaps Yunha did not know something about berserkers. His thoughts were interrupted by his grandmother. She asked why her grandson was awake. Yunha couldn't realize how long she had been with him. He did not even feel her presence. The boy said that he woke up early because he managed to sleep in the car. The grandmother put her jacket over her grandson. She said that Yunha would have to sleep a lot to become an adult. Yunha remembered his grandmother. She was always there when he was lost in thought. Grandma was always waiting for Yunha to start talking, no matter what. Problems, feelings, or nonsense. Then Yunha asked his grandmother why she was awake. But she smiled and said that it was Yunha's fault. The boy was a little confused by this answer. Yunha remembered what he had always wanted. to be close to his grandmother, not as a child. The grandmother asked Young if he wanted some warm milk, but the boy refused. But his mother was already standing behind him with 3 cups of milk and asked him the same question again. Yunha got scared again, because he could not understand when his mother had come here. His mother pointed to the mug and asked Yunha who was going to drink it. Yunha could not refuse and immediately started to drink the milk. It began to dawn. Then Grandma told Mama and Yunha what had happened. Mom said she was shocked to hear her neighbors call. But Grandma assured her that the neighbor always had a tendency to exaggerate things. Mom went on to say that she started to worry a lot after hearing the news about her grandmother's health. Yunha drank milk and analyzed the situation. It turned out that Grandma had just stumbled and bruised herself a bit. Grandma said she fell because she was distracted. Mom did not immediately understand what she meant. She thought she might have been imagining it, but when she went up the stairs, she saw him. Yunga's mom was skeptical, but her grandmother asked her to listen to the rest of the story. The man waved his hands and told her not to go upstairs. The grandmother turned to Young and said that these words were most likely addressed to him. The boy thought about it. It would be very strange to call it just a fantasy. If something went wrong, the whole family would die like his grandfather. If it was him, she should have told him about it earlier. It was getting darker and darker. Grandma told me about her vision. In it, Grandpa said that there was a cute lonely deer outside, so she went out to look and it was Yunha. Mom was surprised at the comparison to a deer. She remembered that she had also had a similar dream about her grandfather leaving a deer. My grandmother thought that my mother was clairvoyant, but the woman denied it. His mother changed the subject and asked Yunha what he wanted to be when he grew up. Yunha thought about it. He was overcome with anxiety. He imagined thousands of living dead people begging him for help, and they were all shrouded in manna. Young became scared and went deep into these thoughts. But his mom pulled him out of it, asking if he was okay. Yunha looked behind him to check for the dead. There were none. Then he lied and said he just didn't know what he wanted to become. But his grandmother supported him. She assured him that at that age, it was normal not to know what you wanted to become. She advised Yun not to rush into a choice. Life is meant to be lived through happy and difficult moments, making friends and quarreling with them, learning and playing. And someday Yunha will be able to find his calling. Yunha looked at his grandmother, who advised him to just live until he realized what he wanted to be. Yunha was a little upset by this banal advice. His mother and grandmother hugged him and told him that time was on his side, and that they believed in him and that he would succeed. His mother said that Yunha's name meant the universe with unlimited power. It was the first time the boy heard this. Mom smiled into Yunha's face and promised that she would always be proud of him. His grandmother added that she was ready to support him as well. Yunha was happier than ever with his family. Suddenly, Yuna opened the door to the house, wanting milk too. She approached the family. Her mother was surprised that the girl had woken up so early. Her grandmother offered Yuna her mug. The girl could not refuse. Watching this, Yunha remembered something. He stretched out his hands to his grandmother, holding a paper flower, and asked her to take it. The grandmother thanked her grandson and promised to put the craft in a prominent place in the house. Yunha knew that his grandmother wanted to show off his work to others, and his grandmother knew that he knew. But it didn't matter that much anymore. Yunha wanted to give his grandmother as many good memories as possible in her life. The sun was already high. Yunha watched his family go by. In his mind, he thanked his grandmother for raising him the way he is.